And you continue to grind as an author. And there is another underlying reason why you're doing this. You enjoy it, but there's another reason. Tell us that reason and why the Abbey Rose mystery
All right.
series.
Um, Having been a pastor most of my life and youth minister before that and education minister, so I have a lot of ministry behind me. The faith aspect is a part of me, but it's also coming from my counseling time and seeing that uh, people in the church, people expect the church to be, at least act perfect, but it's just made up of sinners who have been saved by grace. And so things happen in the church that don't necessarily honor God. And so I wanted to address people who have been hurt somewhere along the line by someone in the church or acting as the church. And they have gone astray as far as away from the church, away from God. And so Abby becomes that character, having grown up in a very, very strict missionary family where her father is not necessarily authentic. He believes, but he controls, he's very strict, he's very judgmental. And so it's kind of like the Old Testament God version. And so she gets pushed away. And when this tragic event happens to her, you see how her father reacts to it, pushing her further away from God and from the church. So with Watergrave, I force her into that church setting because that's where the mystery is. That's where the death is. And as a homicide detective, she has to go into the church and look at the people with her filter. She's expecting all of this hypocrisy. And what she finds is a character who is the widow of the victim, Susan Ripley, who becomes that catalyst for her to start rethinking things. Susan becomes her friend. She also becomes that genuine picture of a Christ-like person that we see. Book two, I start introducing a second of those kind of characters with her, and book three, it kind of all comes to a head where you have someone who is committing crimes based on the Ten Commandments and taking it literally versus the heart of, loving God and loving others. So everything I try to do in here is a faith-based and a faith message, but of course the mysteries are the primary story. These are all underlying factors.
And absolutely, the other stuff is underlying factors. But you think about ultimately the message that, especially with what's going on in our world today, to be able to do it in a way that's entertaining and is bringing people together, such a huge thing, seeing your fans grow and your readers grow.
Yes, and those people who have read it who have been atheists, those people who have been hurt by the church, I'm hearing back from them. They're identifying with Abby, and that's kind of my foot in the door with them. So hopefully they'll follow her story. And this one is the 6 book story arc. And so by the end of those 6 books, you see how ultimately Abby resolves and reconciles with God and the church.
Right. And when we see that process happen firsthand, and this is where people are always probably asking you, what's going to happen to Abby? What's going to happen to Abby? Right.
Right, and they expect once it goes on a good course that it's going to stay there, and there are plunges, and there are things that trigger her, and so she goes up and down until there's that final steady push forward.
And we can't wait to see that. But as to make things entertaining, I'm sure your team tells you you got to make it so that Abby's not completely just dealing with an easy life. It's got
Oh
to be
no,
complex, right?
yes, and her backstory, which also comes in story by story, book by book, you learn more of what she's been dealing with and trying to suppress, and so that's another reason she's gotten that distance.
This, yeah, absolutely. And you're hoping, drawing from that, are the people that are that are left the church understanding how you, especially reading the first book, to see specifically what you're seeing in this journey with Abby?
Yeah, and it's normalized that conversation. where it's not just a black and white issue of everything's perfect or everything's terrible. There are real humans living still in sin, dealing with their faith and struggling as you are. You're not the only one out there.
Right. And if you're not the only one out there, you got to prove why you're the only one, not the only one
Right.
out there.
Well, and that the one or two people that hurt you don't really speak for the whole and don't really speak for God as that they claim to do. And it's that authenticity that I want to get to, that there are people there. There are genuine people who love you and love God.
And it's hard to find them, especially when people are the way people's social life is different now, right? How people commune is different than they used to be. That's where the
Right.
church needs to stay around because it was a place of community where everyone had hopefully the same mindset.
Mm-hmm. And what we find is a lot of churches are giving into the culture, giving up the Bible and giving up what they believe to meet the culture and kind of adapt to it.
So tell me, how's that happening? What are you hearing about that?
Well, some of the things that you'll see in Watergrave and that you'll see in The Least of These, which comes out in mid-July, are based on loosely things that I have seen from stories that I know of that where a youth minister took advantage of his youth, where you have that conflict on control of the church, where there's the stigma of us versus them. At least of these deals with that homelessness versus the wealth, but it's also an issue for the church. How do we react to those? Do we welcome those who just look like us and act like us and believe like us? Or is God's house open to anyone?
And you feel the gospel's not preached in a lot of churches.
I think it's preached. I don't think it's lived out.
So, like, what do you see? Like, does that frustrated you to leave as a pastor because of that?
Oh, yeah. And even struggling with my own life in that, it's easy to come up with a sermon and preach that within the box, within the walls of the church, but to take that out into the culture and take that out to the people who are hurting. That's what I'm trying to do with this book and with this writing, and then hopefully that'll build me a platform to be able to talk about that more.
Would you ever consider becoming a pastor again? If like later in your career, like
If
especially if the
that's what
book.
God told me to do, I'll do it.
So God told you to stop being a pastor?
I feel very strongly that that was my season for stepping down. Yes.
Wow. And do you feel now that you have a better platform with this book?
I do. I think I'm reaching more people, and when you're in that church, you're in that really that internal community, but you're also in that little external community. But I've got people that have contacted me from London. I've got people that have read this in Germany, and which blows my mind. And just being able to reach people that I never even thought of reaching.
Right. And that's the feeling you have that makes it
Mm-hmm.
so rewarding as an author. And this is kind of tell people this didn't happen where you're getting feedback from Germany and all these things in your first books. This is like your really kickoff of where your brand is going.
Yes, yes, and of course that helps with things like this with you.
But explain how that feeling is. Like before, it was like waiting to get feedback. And I talk about this all the time, Mitchell. It was very interesting. I had New York Times bestselling author on my show. I know you're going to be a New York Times bestselling author someday. If you stick with me and we keep going, that's going to happen. You're going to have that moniker. That basically he talked about the struggles as an author, and they were he was the co-author of The Relic that was made into the movie The Relic. And he basically talked about in this conversation that they didn't have some good heavy wins after that big thing. And
Mm-hmm.
they had to keep plugging away till they finally had another hit. So, what does it teach you, Mitchell, as a writer?
Persevere. You can't take those little ego hurts and pains and the little wounds along the way and just quit. If you're going to do that, then don't get in the business. Anytime you're in the entertainment business, you got to be ready for the critique. You got to be ready for someone to step in there, and some people make it personal. Some people just make it about the product, which is what it should be, the quality and the content. But some people take the opportunity to jab at you and your beliefs and what you think. And so you just have to stick with it. The first book was probably sold to, family and friends only. The second series got a little bit further out there, and then this one, I've learned to get help and to do social media, to do podcasts, to do websites, all of those things, and it's working.
And it's a process. Doesn't
Oh yeah,
happen. And then the next book comes, and then the next book. But I think that the lesson people need to learn if they've written a book, and it's not hit the mustard. It might not be you. It might be the message. It
mhm,
might be the book. But if you love to write, keep doing it.
right.
Do what you love to do, and you won't have to work another day in your life if you're great at it. And did you have to look in the mirror at times to see if you felt you were going to be great at something like writing? Did you have to keep going to finally get the validation or that you needed to prove what you've been able to prove with Watergrave?
I still don't think I'm great yet, but the funny thing is, when I was writing it earlier, I just thought I was the best thing since sliced bread. And I had really no effort put into the editing process. I would write it first and just think this is perfect. And it's editing. It's taking things out that don't matter to the story, making sure that you keep the things that are essential in. I'm last night I got the first draft of the screenplay sent to me, so we have to pare it down, and I have to go through it for content reasons and say this is essential for the longer story, and this isn't. And so
Oh
by
yeah,
time wise, we got to cut things out that don't really matter to the whole story.
and that can come kind of ruffle your feathers at
It
times.
does. It does. Because you think, well, I put it in there. It's important.
And
So,
see, this is the experience that I see with even editors of, let's say, that are or someone critique from a client, and how you take that feedback. Do you take that feedback in a way and say or do you go and say, I shouldn't have done that?
I think you have to know exactly what the story was there for. And that's where you judge the critique, not as a personal attack or not as you know, a wound to my ego, as I said earlier. But this will make the story better, or this will not make the story better. And you sift through those things and you take the things that make the story better.
And it's about keep persevering. Best
Right.
place people go is mitchellscarnesauthor.com. Appreciate
Yes,
it,
sir.
Mitchell.
All
Thanks,
right.
sir. All right, that's a special simulcast of the Neil Haley Show and the Mitchell Carnes S